Welcome to Confessions of a Youth Worker, the podcast that lifts the lid on the inspiring, challenging and often untold stories from the world of youth and community work. I'm Sabrina Dennis, CEO of First Class Foundation, and from where I've sat over the last few years, I've seen the incidents of knife crime, gun crime and more tragedy and loss than I could have ever imagined. Over the last 2 years, youth violence has increased by 13% and drug-related offences by 52%, making youth violence a core priority for local police. In each episode, I'll be diving into the heart of the work that is shaping the future of our communities and the lives of young people everywhere. This is Confessions of a Youth Worker. Hi and welcome back to another episode of Confessions of a Youth Worker. This is episode 5 and I'm super excited. It's an all-female lineup today. Yes, Black Girl Magic.
Yes.
Absolutely excited. We're going to be lifting the lid on mental health and youth violence today, and I am joined by some phenomenal ladies.
Oh, thank you.
So to my right, I see you know how to take compliments.
Yes,
this is
thank
just
you.
everything to me. So I'm joined on my right by Dr. Chanel Dennis. She's a clinical psychologist and accredited cognitive behavioural psychotherapist with years of clinical experience. On my left is Talisa Mosquita. She is a qualified cognitive behavioural psychotherapist as well, registered mental health nurse and level 3 personal trainer. Yes. When I do that next time, it will look way better than it looked just then.
Come to some classes.
Not making any promises. Today, they run a Melanin and Moods CIC, and Melanin and Moods was established in 2020 to provide specialist support to Black and Brown communities with a special interest in providing culturally sensitive approaches to communities who have not always accessed traditional mental health services. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. This is great. Honestly, we've had some phenomenal discussions. We've talked all sorts of things, but I think the undercurrent to a lot of the things we've discussed so far and confessions is around mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah. And two of the finest young people here, and I'm saying young because you're younger than me.
Thank you. I'll say that.
So finest people here that are in the industry and you're working incredibly hard to build up our communities to kind of break that stigma around talking around mental health. But before we get in the first question, and I've asked everybody this question who's been on this show so far, it's about being a youth worker. So I've used the words friend, confidant, role model, relatable, someone who's always there. But to you guys, what is a youth worker?
That's a really good question. I think it's all of the above, like you just said. Definitely being someone that is a confident, someone who young people can trust and talk to, and also know that what they're gonna say is kept confidential as well. Especially in the work that I do. It's important to be confidential with the things that they're going to tell you, because you're probably the only person that they're going to share the information with. So having that kind of safe, open, compassionate space for them to be able to talk is a youth worker. Yeah.
Super important. Compassionate, confident, confidentiality.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, I agree with Chanel. I think also just being on a certain level, obviously making sure that you're keeping those boundaries, but I think in the past when I've worked with young people, they've found it really easy to talk to me because we're relatable. Same kind of age. But also just, in tune with where they're coming from and what they're going through and their experiences. So I think that's a big part of it, just being relatable to them and not judging them for whatever choices they've made.
Yeah.
Whew, the judgment piece.
Yeah.
And the safe space piece, I think, is super important. One of the things we've talked about so far is around people, especially as youth workers, feeling like people look down their nose at them because we work in the community and, you're just like a nice person doing a nice thing, helping the kids. But actually, there's quite a lot that goes into it. And what you've just said there about offering non-judgmental safe spaces is super important. In your line of work then, how do you feel that youth violence plays a part in what you do?
Massive
Huge
part.
part.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have worked in the community with young people who suffered from schizophrenia, bipolar, and a lot of them were caught up in youth violence and things like that. And not to say that it was their mental health that caused that, but there was definitely a relationship between their mental health and the choices that they made to go down that route, and a lot of it did end up in violence. So
Yeah. Same. I was going to say similar as well, but not even to the extreme end of mental health problems in the presentations that you've seen with schizophrenia. Sometimes it's just that lower level stuff that we might call like depression and anxiety, and seeing how much that feeds into the violence as well. Working in CAMS, which is Children and Adolescents Mental Health Service, and in an inner city area as well, you see a lot, especially with the boys more so. You do see it with the females as well, but often a little thing like anxiety becomes something different. And I give an example. Someone I worked with yesterday, actually, he gets the bus to and from school, and when he was at the bus stop recently, he was feeling anxious and worried that other boys that he's in at the bus stop were going to do something to him. There's nothing behind it, no reason why. They've never seen these boys before, but his anxiety was telling him, oh, these boys are going to do something to me. I need to be ready. So that's a perfect example of like a slower level anxiety and how that can then become something a lot bigger and feed into violence, because then he thinks now he needs to be prepared.
Wow. And his experience was there an experience of?
No. And he's so young. I won't say his age for confidentiality, but he's such a young guy. I'll say he's in year 7.
Wow.
He's in year 7, and he has this massive fear that something bad is going to happen to him. And it's not through previous experiences that he's had personally, but just from experiences that he's heard of
Other
people.
people's experiences.
Yeah, and from the area as well, because it's not actually that far-fetched that someone could potentially attack you or hurt you in that area.
My God. And that's crazy, because you'd think that he's so young, year 7, what have you been exposed, like what, really? You're like 11, 12, you wouldn't really have been...
you'd hope that they've been shielded from
that. But if that's your reality, then here we go. You know, we have to do something about that. And I think it's something about that we've talked about. I mean, yesterday we were talking about the worst end of the scale when it comes to youth violence and loss of life. But what you've just said there is potentially the beginning of youth violence. Tell me about instances, like I know we speak to young people all the time in the charity and their families in particular, and they say, oh, we always knew there wasn't something quite right, but there's no help. There was no way of knowing. We're jumping ahead, but I'm jumping ahead. I'm going to reverse. But yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about things that parents or young people might be displaying as signs, because I think it's happening. It's here. You know, more recently we've had a pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure everybody knows about the increases in mental health or ill health for young people. Yeah. Let's start with the first question. Let's rewind back. What even is mental health?
So,
go on then. Who's going to go?
Mental health. Everyone has mental health, just like we all have physical health. And mental health is just about how you think, how you feel, how you behave. It's everything that encompasses you as a person. And I guess when we talk about mental health, we often talk about it in the wrong way. We say, oh, you know, this person's got mental health, but in reality, we mean they've got a mental health problem or a mental health issue or mental ill health. Well, everyone's got mental health.
Yeah. And it's so often, oh, we've got a mental health problem, but have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Everyone has a mental health problem.
Can we go there, please? Because there's this increase in people, everybody, I don't want to say everybody, that's, ignore my terms are wrong, but there's this prevalence of people saying, I've got anxiety. Or, you know, my anxiety. And it's like, well,
it's not really on a clinical level. It's just because they feel maybe a little bit worried about something, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's anxiety, because it's normal to worry. It's normal to have anxiety.
Right.
It's just the amount of which it affects you and affects your daily life.
Because this is the thing, you have children and people now saying, I have anxiety, so I can't go to school, for instance. And that's a thing, but you're worried about a particular thing that's going to happen at school. So Yeah, talk to me about that, because I know you're in CAMHS and I know you're working with young people all the time in and out of schools. So tell me about that. How common is that? Because I feel like I hear that all the time.
Oh, all the time. I've been on the phone to schools today actually about non-engagement with education, which is often the case with a lot of the young people that we see in CAMHS. But I think what's happened is that we have a better language now for describing mental health and therefore mental health problems. Yeah. But what I think is getting misconstrued sometimes is the understanding of what is a mental health problem, because like Talisa said, you can feel anxious and that's not actually a mental health problem. Anxiety is a very normal human emotion that we're all meant to experience. It keeps us safe. Yeah. So, but because young people might feel anxious, or the symptoms, the physical sensations of anxiety, they don't think, oh, this is a problem. Something I shouldn't. So they're misinterpreting how they're feeling, and then they're thinking, oh, okay, I can't go to school now. Or they're associating school with being the cause of their anxiety. But actually, there's probably nothing at school that's making them feel anxious. They just know that when they're in school, they feel anxious.
Wow.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of relearning or re-educating
definitely
to do.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I know that recently there's been a lot of talk around mental health becoming almost a bit like a circus of people having so much to say and everybody feeling like there's something going on for them, and actually how do we kind of create a sense of calm and re-educate then in that instance?
I just think people don't really fully understand mental health, whether it's mental ill health or like healthy mental health. And as I said, we do need a lot more education around it so that people are aware of, okay, this is when things become an issue. Like if you're having these signs, these symptoms, that's when maybe you do need to seek help. But as Chanel said, it is normal, it's healthy to have some level of anxiety. It's normal, it's healthy to have some level of low mood, because life's not always going to be happy and great. But it is just about re-educating people and letting them know, okay, if this, that, or the other happens, then maybe you might need some professional help. But otherwise, it's just about building that resilience and learning how to deal with it and how to manage it.
Resilience. Another word. These are buzzwords and we hear them all the time, and we talk about, we have whole programs around building mental health resilience for young boys in particular, who sometimes experience something that's not very nice and can't recover from it. So I guess my question is to you guys, what are the things that we can be promoting our young people do to build their resilience first? Because I think that then leads on to better mental health. Are there things that they can be doing?
I think
Definitely.
psychoeducation first of all, because if we're thinking about diagnosing mental health problems, there's always going to be a criteria of how that is diagnosed, and what constitutes as good mental health or healthy mental health or problematic mental health problems. So I think the first part is recognizing that actually low days, sometimes we have low days, and that's not depression, that's just a low day. And so understanding what is a mental health problem, and then firstly giving them the self-help tools, because I think sometimes they just catastrophize and think, oh no.
Or they want a quick fix. Because I think the younger generation, they're so used to having things like that, instantaneous, that they feel low and then they want to feel better again within like 10 seconds. And obviously it doesn't work like that.
Patience, have patience.
So we're getting to tolerate that discomfort, isn't it? Because sometimes you will feel anxious, but you can tolerate it.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes. I think as us as adults, let's be honest.
Everyone really.
Everyone. I don't like this is, you get a little, okay, I'm warming up a bit now. I've done a few, but you get a little bit anxious doing stuff like this. You think, oh, should I run? Just, let's cancel. Tell everybody, forget it, pack up, let's go. But no, you push through, and I think maybe role models and seeing others get through.
So that's a big part of it as well, because at the end of the day, they are young people, so they are still learning. And even in their brain's still developing, and their mental health therefore is still developing as a result of it. So I guess it's important to have those role models around them who can teach them about how to manage their mental health and give them strategies to cope if they are struggling, which not all young people have sometimes, which is the unfortunate part.
This is true. And I guess in the role of a youth worker or engagement officer or anybody who's working with young people, that in itself is doing more good
Yeah.
than harm if we have the right people.
Yeah.
Already I'm like enlightened, and I'm thinking, gosh, okay, so there's just so much to think about, because I know social media is a real big thing, and I want to talk about that.
Yes.
I mean, we're here recording
Yes.
and
To
it's
go on
probably
social
going to
media.
go on social media. I don't want to throw it down the drain totally. But what are your thoughts on social media and mental health and the connect? You know, is there a link? Is there, or is it worse? Are we making it sound way worse than it actually is? I know.
100% there is a connection.
Definitely.
But also I would say that sometimes I think we make it seem worse than it is. I think now, because we have the knowledge that social media can have an impact on young people's mental health, they are more aware of it. So it's managed better in terms of their access and their use of it. But before, when social media was a new thing, we didn't necessarily think about the impact it was then going to have on someone's self-esteem and their self-confidence. But I say that because I've had conversations with some of my young people about social media, and they was like, oh, but I like it, it's good, and it's good because I get to learn XYZ, and I get to do this, and I get to connect with people, and I get to see this, and I get to do. So there are some good elements of social media, but there's definitely the negative elements which impacts on someone's self-esteem and the self-identity as well.
Identity is a big one. I guess.
Because there's so much unrealistic expectations on social media, so
Absolutely.
they think it's normal. It's not.
No.
It's not real life.
It's not. I think they are kind of slowly coming to learn that as well. Like, I've got a young daughter, well, she's 13, and even she says to me, like, she's very aware that everything you see on there isn't as it is in real life. So I think the message is getting out there. It's just about maybe, you know, as parents, us kind of continuing to reiterate, you know, this is social media, it's not real life, and just setting those boundaries, you know, having the downtime, locking the phone off when it's time for them to come off
Plugging
it.
out the internet.
Yeah.
Your
I've got
data's
the
run out.
app on my phone, so I can just lock it off when I think she's had her time.
You see, but that's being an empowered parent to feel that you can do that as well. And I think that's a really important message to drive home, that actually as parents you do have the power.
Still have the
you know,
power,
you can't just say, well, you got no data and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, we're not on there now. Or your screen time's over. I know one of my daughters hates it because it's like, I think it's like 5 o'clock or something really stupid. So literally she's got the time while I think there's a few hours while she's at school.
Yeah.
A few hours, like an hour, I think, in the morning. And by the time she gets home, screen time's finished. Yeah. And she's asking me for more time. I'm like, no, go and look at
Used
something
it wisely.
else. Yeah, go and look at something else. But I think you're right. I think also as adults, I think, and we've talked about this a little bit as well, is that I think as adults, we know what some people are doing on socials. And so we probably project that and think that that's what our kids are probably doing.
Yeah.
And we've seen some adults doing the most wild behaviour online.
You do.
And not exactly.
But you know, it's not just social media. I think it's the internet in general. Because like back in the day before social media, it used to be like the chat rooms and
MySpace.
MySpace.
What was the other one?
MSN Messenger.
all of that kind of thing. And I think sometimes we forget that those spaces still exist.
Yeah.
So we're so focused on social media, but forgetting that people are getting caught up in chat rooms and talking to people they shouldn't be talking to and getting caught up in all of that stuff, and on websites they shouldn't be on, the black web and all of that kind of stuff. So sometimes social media gets too much of the limelight. It's the internet in general that we need to be aware of. And
That is, well, you just like drop the mic because I think you're right. I think we literally don't even talk about that.
Yeah.
We also don't talk about gaming.
Yeah,
that's
true.
a massive one as well.
Huge.
We touched on it, but you are talking to whoever, wherever,
strangers.
completely around the world. We've not even gone into that. So I guess you're right. There's things that we need to be aware of as adults to make sure that we're monitoring and protecting our children and keeping them safe. So when you look at crime, because here we are talking about youth violence, and, you know, I'm going to be questioned every time I say that, but what even is youth violence? How much does mental health contribute to those crime statistics that we see from your lens?
Yeah. I would... Go on. Sorry.
I think we can't definitely say it causes it because, you know, we could never say that. But I would say that there are certain links to, you know, mental health affecting levels of crime in the youth because, again, as Chanel was saying, sometimes if they are feeling low or feeling anxious, or even just that kind of wanting to belong, feeling like they're not a part of something, and that's affecting their mood, they may turn to people who are doing, you know, unhealthy things in the community as a way of fitting in, and that could lead them down that kind of road into crime and violence. So I think there's definitely a link. But
yeah, I was going to say similar as well, that I think it's a factor but not the only factor. I think everything else comes into play as well, and so especially when thinking about the environment that they are raised in, the area that they're raised in, all of the ACEs, which also has an impact as well, can impact on the development of a mental health problem, but also means it's more likely that young people could be involved in crime or other kind of antisocial behaviour, as they call it. But I think thinking about ACEs and developmental trauma, that can have a massive impact, because it's simply the way that their brain is developing, which keeps them in that kind of fight or flight mode, which can then lead them to getting involved in more crime. So if you're thinking about it from that aspect, and we all go through development, and a lot of us have ACEs, even though we're not aware of. ACEs is adverse childhood experiences. That can have an impact, and that might be more of a connecting factor rather than
the mental health
issue. Let's talk about trauma. Because I know it's giving trauma. It's a workshop. And you got to check out Melanin and Moods, seriously, for more information on stuff that they do and workshops that they do for the community. But trauma, I think we hear it bandied around a lot as well. I think, as I said, there's loads of language and buzzwords that are out there now. Talk to me about trauma. Talk to me about what is trauma. What is it?
Trauma can be a one-off incident. It can be multiple incidents. It can be, historical. It's something that's happened to someone. And again, one person's trauma isn't exactly the same as any other person's trauma. Just because you found something traumatic doesn't mean another person's going to find the same thing traumatic. It's something that affects the way you feel, the way it affects your emotions, it affects your beliefs about yourself, your safety, the world, other people in it. And it can be long-standing. It can definitely impact you for years, decades in the future.
Yeah. And I think sometimes trauma then leads to specific PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. But not everyone who experiences trauma or has trauma will have that kind of specific experience of PTSD. So when you're having PTSD, that's more so characterized by like having flashbacks of the traumatic incident or incidents, if it's more than one. Maybe having nightmares about it, being quite hypervigilant of the past traumatic incident you've been through. But you can have like developmental trauma, which is the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, and that's all about more so from your caregivers, whether that's your parents or whoever your caregiver is, and their response into caring for you. Were your parents present? Was there any kind of emotional, physical, sexual neglect, kind of abuse, which is developmental trauma? Then we just have like the trauma. Then we have PTSD. Then we have complex trauma. Complex trauma is multiple traumatic incidences all kind of mixed up in one. But I think sometimes we use trauma too freely. It's like, oh, that was so traumatic. And it's just really? It's another buzzword. I'm like, was it?
Was it traumatic?
Or was it just difficult? Yeah. But to experience trauma is a very specific type of mental health problem that you might be experiencing with anxiety, depression, anger, whatever it presents in different ways for different people.
And that could explain a lot of why we see what we see in our young black boys in particular, especially that anger, the inability to forgive, that fear that they walk with, where they feel that they might have to carry or do something. But I want to talk about, I don't know if there's a thing called secondary trauma. Talk to me about that.
Vicarious trauma. So vicarious trauma is experiencing a traumatic response from other people's experiences. So it's not necessarily that you've experienced it yourself, but you've either heard it or you've seen it, or you've just witnessed it, but you haven't actually been a direct person that's been impacted by the traumatic incident.
Right, okay.
But it is sometimes called secondary trauma, but more commonly vicarious
trauma.
Yeah.
I say that because in a number of incidences, and I know we're talking about youth work and young people, but I'm also thinking about youth workers.
Yeah.
And I know that it's not necessarily talked about, but the things that they see,
Oh,
and
100%,
like
definitely.
they hear, they see times when they're talking to young people, the times when they're intervening in scenarios that are incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
How might an adult display that then when they're doing, say they're in the role of a youth worker? What might happen for them?
It's a very similar presentation for PTSD or like normal trauma. So when someone experiences vicarious trauma, based on what they're hearing or they're seeing or they're witnessing, it's understandable that you're going to have those similar feelings that that person might have had who's actually in traumatic incident. So you might feel that same fear, that same anger, that same sadness, that same irritability, whatever it is. It's understandable that you would then experience it. But when it becomes vicarious trauma is when you're unable to let that go. And then that's when we know that actually probably this person's experiencing vicarious trauma, and then that might then be characterized by the similar symptoms, such as you're thinking about it when you're at home, like you can't switch off. You're then irritable with your family and friends. You're having nightmares. You can't sleep. Changes to your appetite. All of that is impacting you because of what you've seen. Yeah.
So I think it is really important to just continue to provide that kind of culturally sensitive space for Black men to come to talk freely, to also have the support. They've really appreciated having Chanel and I as the kind of facilitators, because we were a little bit skeptical, thinking, are they going to open up as much because we're women?
Female,
But actually they've said how much they appreciate having us there, because it allows them to kind of bring out that softer, more I don't want to say feminine, because they'll
come for you for that.
They'll kick off. They
about
don't like
that.
feminine. They don't like vulnerable.
Yeah. But it allows them to connect to like their emotional side, which they may not necessarily connect to if it was
Very
just a group
good
of men.
saying, emotional side, because none of them wants to be classed as feminine or vulnerable. They're going to be strong, which is a whole nother conversation, isn't it? A whole nother conversation. And I think it's important because I say that because I know, again, that cultural appropriateness of creating safe spaces is what makes people open. If you feel like you're welcome in the space and the people are relatable, because you are relatable, like,
and then just some things that don't need to be explained. Some things that are just understood without.
It's normal, because this is what we do here.
Exactly.
This is who we are. Like, why have you got that food? Why is the music playing and you're trying to talk?
Exactly.
Or why does everyone come in and like firms or daps each other?
Like, why are you looking like you're punching up each other?
Like it's just
don't need to explain.
I think that's what it is as well. Just having a space where you can be yourself without having to kind of put on that mask or pretend to be someone else.
It's like they can take that mask off as they step in, kind of thing. Because often they're coming from workplaces where they may be the only Black person there. So, and you know, sometimes that's heavy. In that space all day, every day. You can't really always authentically be who you are.
Oh, you want to talk about microaggressions and race? I mean, we have a few minutes. We have a few minutes left, because I think that it's a big part of who we are, and also around mental health and mental ill health. But talk to me a little bit about microaggressions, because you brought it up there and it was something that I was ruminating on while you were talking about it. I like that word. So talk to me about microaggressions, or they say death by 1,000 cuts. What is that like? And I know it's a trauma piece as well. So talk to me about that.
I think, you know what? I think everyone experiences microaggressions differently, because sometimes we become so used to them, like we're desensitized to it, and we just learn to get on with it and just accept that that's what it is. That some people might not be affected by them, while other people may be more affected by them. But it's just those little, the things that go unsaid, the feelings that you get. Sometimes it's just like I didn't like that, the way they said that, or why did they do the tone, or the look, or the attitude. It's just something that stirs a reaction within you that, you know, they wouldn't say to someone who was not Black.
And I guess that's a difficult part about microaggressions, because it's not outright or blatant racism. So it's not something that you can directly say they did this or they called me this. It's so micro that it's the little things, it's the felt sense that is the aggression, what people are experiencing.
Absolutely. In one of our reports, we talk about the impact, what pulls down men's mental health, and microaggressions was number one, next to living in unsafe neighborhoods and all the other things. But microaggressions for a black man are totally different than they are, I think, for us as women. I had a scenario the other day where we were in a lift, as in with me and my husband were in a lift, and I've got out of the lift to go somewhere, and he's carried on and he's going back to meet me, so he's going back in the lift. But the lift's opened, and there were two. There was a little white girl and I think a little mixed heritage girl in the lift, and he saw their face and he chose not to get in the lift. And it's not that they didn't say anything, they didn't do anything, but the feeling he felt, he knew he couldn't get in the lift with them. And that was all. And he said, wow, like, oh my gosh, I felt really black. I felt like a big black scary guy, and I'm not a big black scary guy.
It's like ingrained in us, I think, through like past experiences, parents' experiences, because they kind of set the blueprint for us. So if they've learned, okay, you can't be yourself in these spaces, you can't do this, you can't say that because it's dangerous, or, you know, people will think this, that, or the other of you, then you learn to shrink yourself.
Exactly. And then I suppose that's emotional wear and tear, which then does nothing positive for us moving forward.
And then we wonder why people are angry or irritable, but what we're seeing is like the top of the iceberg, but underneath is so much more going on. And that microaggressions could be one of them.
I mean, we and there's so much to talk about. Like we literally scratched the surface on mental health for our young people. But so essentially, so you talked about, and I was thinking this actually as you were talking about, you know, microaggressions and the iceberg and vicarious trauma, and there's something that runs around in my head that I hear I say it sometimes, that, you know, because you're black, you have to work twice as hard to have half as much, or to have nothing at all, you know, whatever the scenario is. But how much of that messaging, I suppose, and programming that we tell our young people has a negative impact on them? And then do they have that vicarious trauma because of those messages that I said?
Yeah, I think so. Especially if we're thinking about the stories that are shared by parents to young people. So like going back to the example that I gave earlier of that young boy who was anxious about people at the bus stop, it's not because of any experiences that he's had, but experiences that he's heard, that's his vicarious trauma, because now he's anxious about something happening to him. But I think when we think about our parents' experiences, it has such a massive impact on just how we live our life day to day, and also your sensitivity to things as well, because I think you do become a bit more sensitive to thinking, okay, is the way that someone's responding to me, is that because I'm black, or is that because, is it just happening? Like, would that happen to someone else? So I think, it has a massive impact on our parents' experiences, their stories that they tell us, how they tell us to behave and act on the street, and all of that stuff. Does impact.
Wow. Good grief, guys. We've covered so much in a tiny window, really, for something that really we could have had a whole week long talk and discussion about. And as we kind of bring it in and bring it to a close, there is one other thing that I ask every guest to do when they come on, and that is their confession. What about that? So I tend to not tell you too much about this bit, because I just want your reality. I want your real truths in this moment. But if there is a confession, a bee in your bonnet, or a moment of inspiration even, or a charge that you have for people, what would it be? What is your confession? Melanin and Moods.
My confession is just Well, I guess this is my charge. Just listen. Listen to understand, not to respond. Because sometimes I feel like when young people are sharing their stories and sharing their experiences, we're quick to respond and say, oh, but you need to do this. Oh, you need to come straight home from school. Oh, you need to, whatever it is. And sometimes the motivation behind that is because we want to keep the young people safe. We want to keep them out of danger. But sometimes it means that you're just missing their whole story and their whole experience. And sometimes I just want to be heard. Like, I just need you to hear
Oh my
me say
gosh.
that I'm scared out here, or this is really difficult for me. I don't necessarily need you to respond. I just need you to hear me. So my charge to people working with youth would be sometimes just listen to hear, not to respond.
Oh my God. I know everyone's like, that is like a real strong message, but received loud and clear.
What's my confession? I guess my confession is, even as a therapist, I don't always take my own advice and speak as much as I should. So I would say definitely find someone who you can confide in and just open up as much as you feel comfortable to do. Because again, I always say this to everyone, speaking really does help. So as much as you can, try and talk about what you're going through, because you really don't have to be alone. There are people out there who do want to care for you and help you and support you. And it's just about trusting that you're going to be cared for in the way that you want to be cared for. So yeah, my charge would be for youth workers to continue to just provide that safe space to build those therapeutic relationships, so that you young people do feel like they can confide in you and can open up to you, and that you are that safe space for them to talk to.
Wow. Ladies, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
It's been a good conversation.
It has.
You enjoyed it?
Yeah, it's been
really
good.
It's been good. It has been so insightful. I feel that there's going to be so much more to come. I feel like there's going to be questions and all sorts of things that come from this. But for now, we are drawing it to a close. So thank you so much once again to Dr. Chanel and to Lisa for joining us today on Confessions of a Youth Worker. This has been episode 5, where we've been lifting the lid on mental health and youth violence. Wow. Mental health, trauma, vicarious trauma, microaggressions, like all of that stuff has, oh my goodness, it's giving me so much food for thought. But the one thing that stands out to me in that conversation is all around the trauma being felt from the womb. And that as parents, we have to be very mindful about what we're exposing our children to, even before they are born. The fact that things change within the brain, the brain development, and then children living in this constant state of fight. It's no wonder they're angry. It's no wonder they respond in the ways that they do. And it's not because they are being disruptive. It's possibly because they've experienced some trauma.